Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on the Happy PharmD podcast. Today's episode is especially going to help any of you out there who are contemplating on other ways in terms of starting a side hustle, or you may be interested in, been listening to some podcasts or other forms in terms of getting your message out there, but, not really sure if it's something for you. Well, today's pharmacist is a retail pharmacist currently by day, but also hosts his own podcast. We're going to dive deep into how exactly he got to that point and where he was able to determine if that was the right thing for him, and also getting that whole process started. So for any of you out there who are kind of struggling but contemplating on, you have a topic or pharmacy related or not that you really want to get into and possibly start your own podcast, today's episode will especially be helpful in that aspect. I'd like to welcome today pharmacist Mitch Lee to the podcast. Hello out there, and thank you for joining me on the Happy PharmD podcast. This is Chris Bakley, and I'm your host. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to make a special announcement to everyone out there. We are offering free access to a webinar for everyone out there that is interested. It is our Career Masterclass. This will primarily help focus on how to escape burnout, get your job offers regularly, and to finally take control of your career. Please feel free to sign up on our link to secure and register for a spot, and it is free. The link is thehappypharmd.com/begin. Again, that is thehappypharmd.com/begin. Feel free to check it out and sign up again for your free spot for this class. Thank you so much, guys, and let's go to the show. All right, well, welcome to the Happy PharmD podcast. Today I have pharmacist Mitch Lee joining us today. Thank you so much for joining, Mitch.
Chris, dude, thanks so much for having me, and I'm stoked to be here.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, I just wanted to kind of start with a brief bio about yourself. If you could just kind of tell everyone listening a little bit about where you went to school, career-wise, where you started, and where you got to today.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So I'm from Southeast Georgia, a little south of Savannah, and a little down there, kind of on the coast. Started working in retail pharmacy when I was like 10 years old. Actually maybe 16 years old when I was like at this mom and pop small pharmacy, that was times when like people would like walk in to pay for medications if they didn't have like their money with them. Like they'd have accounts where you could like write their name on a sheet of paper and their like word was good for it, which would never fly nowadays. But it was kind of cool working in right. It was kind of cool working in that kind of environment. But they taught me to be a tech, and I was like, okay, I could do this possibly for a living. So I applied to pharmacy school at University of Georgia, and my PCAT score was just absolutely awful. It was so bad. I took it a couple of times. I guess I'm just bad at standardized tests, but it was garbage. So I was, UGA just laughed in my face. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm not supposed to be a pharmacist. What am I going to do? So I was like, maybe I'll try a chemistry degree. What the heck am I going to do with that? But I don't know. And then I didn't really like that. So I did like this exercise science thing for a bit. And then advice of a friend, I was like, well, I'll just try and reapply to this like smaller school, nice little small expensive school in Savannah, private school, and got in 2007, graduated in 2010 because it's that accelerated program where you go quarterly or whatever. And so I graduated in 2010. So even though I've been a pharmacist for 10 years now, which is crazy.
It's crazy how fast it must go.
How fast it flies. I've been a pharmacist for 10 years, but I've been in retail, if you include those 2 years at the mom and pop store, maybe like 18 years total, which, by the way, is exactly half of my life, Chris, because I'm 36 years old.
Sounds like a long time when you say it like that.
Yeah, I was, you kind of go through it and it doesn't feel like that much. And then you say it out loud and you're like, oh my gosh. Because I think most people in retail.
That makes me want to think how long I've been in. Well, I'm not in retail anymore, but I was, and it was about 10 years.
And you're going to blink your eyes and it's going to be another 10. It's crazy. But yeah, most people in retail, I think, a lot of people will start out saying, oh, I'm just going to do it for a couple years and, help pay off loans, or this is just temporary. And it's so easy to do that. I said that going into it, and you blink your eyes and you're done. So, but I started out with the company I'm currently at a major chain as a cashier, and then as a technician, then got in pharmacy school. So worked to intern, and then now pharmacist. So I've been with the company for 16 years, I guess, and then total of 18 years retail.
Gotcha. Are you managing now, or are you staffing, or
just staff? I've had the chance to do the PIC, the manager role, and I have declined it, and I'll tell you why. I don't know, man. So I've been working there for a while. I lived in Georgia, I lived in Tennessee. Every school that I went to, bounced around. My company transferred me, so I've worked in so many different stores in my chain, and I think I've spoke maybe to one manager who told me it's worth it. One person told me that I should do it. Like, I'll always be like, hey, should you think I should take them, this down the street or whatever? Like, no, man. I'm like, okay, maybe I won't. Maybe it's a little more responsibility. I think eventually I'll bite the bullet and do it, but right now it's a little too much responsibility.
I think it also depends on what you have going on. Like if you have the time to stay late, if you don't have a family yet, maybe, or if your kids are older, so down the road. Like right now I have a 1-year-old, so I'm like, like at the time.
Oh gosh, you already got your hands full.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm not in retail anymore. But when I was like, I want to, thinking forward, I was like, I want to be home more. I'm already staying, X amount of hours, each week. And I'm like, is it worth it? I get what people like. I think it's great. Yeah. I think I really did like it. It's just a lot of extra time. So you kind of have to be flexible.
Yes. And the district manager comes in and your numbers are down, you're not the one that they're, barking at or whatever. So
True. Yes, absolutely. It takes a lot of stress off if you're not trying.
I think so. Yeah. And like I said, it'll probably come in time. There'll be a time where like the timing's right. It's the right store. It's the right staff, but we'll see.
Yeah. I think the best part of it was that you could control, like it was like done your way. If you like, however you felt comfortable, you can kind of sculpt the staff. And that was a good part about it.
That is true.
But yeah, man. So, and I know you also, as a side hustle, or you also do a podcast, correct? I'm pretty sure.
I do a podcast. Yes, sir. That is correct. I started a podcast this silly little podcast back in July of 2018, and I just released episode 77. So So far, so good.
You do
just
once
a week.
Once a week.
Yeah,
okay, gotcha.
Yeah. They're released on Fridays. Typically, can be like a little better mood. It's Friday. I start the episode out with some applause, which I have sound effects on the podcast.
I heard that.
So it's a way of like making it fun. And
I gotta say,
I knew I wanted sound effects before I started, but I don't know. I bit the bullet because I was like, if I do the sound effects, it's gonna be a small way to like really, really not take myself too seriously, which is the whole idea of the show.
That's how I took it too. Like it's almost a little like it's comedy, a little comedic. I really like the Twilight Zone kind of sound you use.
Little freaky music. I don't get to use that one very much.
I think you used it on like the Tramadol recall. I think if I'm right.
Oh, dude, how freaking scary is that? I mean, I don't know how many people out there are going through a Tramadol recall or a Tramadol back order right now, but cannot get a single tablet in, and people are so mad. But whatever.
I believe it. No, I love the sound effects. It's awesome. But I kind of let's back up really quick. When did where was the whole urge to do that?
Yeah. So I've been working in retail for a couple of years, and honestly, Chris, like when I first started, like things were fine, things were good. I was humming along. I was like, I'm happy with the decision of being a pharmacist. And I moved to Nashville, and there was something about moving to Nashville from Georgia that something kind of clicked in my mind. Like I wasn't as happy, and I think I've been toying around with why, and I think something to do with like, okay, so like in Nashville is kind of different than like small towns in the sense that like when you come here, you can talk to somebody and be like, hey, what do you do? Right. And the person's like, oh, I'm a photographer or I'm a musician. Now, back where I'm from, if you like a small town, if you ask someone like, what do you do? And they're like, oh, I'm a musician or I'm a photographer. They'll be like, okay, cool. But what do you do for money? But like here in Nashville, people are doing like their passions for a job. Right. Right. And so those are like my friends that I connected with up here. And it almost like I started getting this realization like, wait a second, you can actually do something you're passionate about for work. Because from the very beginning of this whole thing, man, the very beginning, much like a lot of people out there, I was doing it for the paycheck. I was doing it for the stability of the job, the paycheck. It wasn't something I wasn't like passionate about medication and like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I can't wait to learn about drugs, Did it because I knew I could do it and I was good at math and science and it was stable. And so I came up here and I was like, I got to figure this out. I feel like I'm somewhat creative and like now I'm just going to work every day and counting prescriptions or checking prescriptions and leaving. So I had to figure out like what to do. I love to write. I love football. I'm like, do I write about football? Do I write fiction? I don't know. So at the time, this was about, early summer 2018. I'd been consuming a lot of podcasts. And so I was like, well, maybe I could do that. And I ran it by some buddies and, I had done the whole thing of like, no, man, no one's going to listen and all that stuff. And I had some roadblocks, but I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to give myself 10 episodes. So I gave myself 10 episodes to start with. And, going into it, I was like, if I get like 15 to 20 listeners a week, I'm still going to do it because this is me just doing it for fun, like a side hustle, like you said.
Of course.
But it got some traction, and I was like, okay, like people were kind of resonating. I think it was hitting some, I don't know, resonating with some people, and so started getting some traction, and it's kind of just kind of grown from there.
Gotcha. That's awesome, man. I mean, I feel like that's a huge leap to, to take as well, just to go from, maybe I'll do it to actually sticking to it and doing it and committing
Yeah.
to it. Did you, and I guess, did you just do a lot of research in terms of figuring out, like, do you do, well, I'll back up there. Do you do the whole process, or do you kind of outsource some of it in terms of, obviously you host
Yeah.
a podcast, but do you do all the editing and everything, or do you kind of
Yeah,
teach
from
yourself?
from record to release, it's all me, and I guess that could be a goal, maybe to start outsourcing that stuff eventually. Because my favorite part is just connecting with my listeners and stuff. But like when it comes to like editing and so, I'm so bad at social media, man. I wish I could like. Pretty soon, I might hire someone to do like all my social media. But yeah, right now it's me from beginning to end. Yeah.
Gotcha. And did, like, when you entered into it, did you have like a main like goal like that you wanted to like reach from doing it? Not just viewership, but in terms of like what you were trying to like resonate with your listeners, like regarding
Yes,
pharmacy?
absolutely. So my first idea of doing it, if I'm being honest with you, Chris, was very just personal and selfish. I was like, I've got to get my creativity out. I can't just keep doing this. So I'll do a podcast. And then I realized that a podcast about Retell Pharmacy, where we, for lack of a better word, make fun of patients or joke, laughingly talk about patients and how funny interactions can be in retail, it can get dark really, really quickly, because it would be really easy just to hit record and be like, oh, our jobs suck. And, like patients are horrible. We don't deserve this. And then in record. And that's the episode. Like, no, like, so I was like, I need to make this have like a redeeming quality to it. And I want to help people. I actually want to try and help other people in our field. And then I realized, like, what makes you feel the best whenever a patient comes up and yells at you for not having like the right flavored Benadryl in stock, right? They'll come up and yell at you and you're like, man, I didn't deserve that. And if you turn to your coworker and be like, did you hear that guy? That was crazy. And they're like, yeah, man, that was nuts. Like that kind of stuff helps you feel better. And so I realized that like the way I could use the podcast to help people, to just let them know like you're not alone. And that's the major driving point of the whole podcast is like, yeah, our jobs can suck. And by the way, it's okay to say your job sucks sometimes. Like that's all right. Even though we're not supposed to, quote unquote, we're not supposed to say that. It might be terrible. Patients do treat us not, it's not great the way patients treat us, but we're all going through it. And also here's maybe some ways we can do it better.
No, I completely, I love that you're not alone. Like we're all in this together. Like that's
an
awesome message. I mean, I being a retail pharmacist a year ago now, for the past 4 years prior, it does feel that way sometimes. You kind of just feel like, why do I dislike this so much, while other people seem to just be like, so happy or enjoying their job.
Exactly.
It does get you, and so, like you said, so, like when I started, I loved it. I thought it was awesome.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was kind of exciting, looking forward to it. And then after time, it does wear on you.
Is that what happened? So is that what happened? You were into it, and it kind of like started to get toned down.
Well, then I mean, after a year, I went to manager, and then I did that for about 2.5 years, or just around 2.5 years, right? A year after college, and burnout's real. But I also only worked at 24-hour stores, so that got to me really quick.
Ooh, that comes with its own challenges for sure.
So I only know crazy. That's all I knew. So
did you work overnight?
When I started, yeah, for like only
like?
For 2 months. Yeah, I loved it the first month, and then I didn't love it when I couldn't sleep during the day. That's what happened. Like the first month, I was like excited, and I like, oh, it's all right. I'll just have a Red Bull, or like I can just have like espresso in my coffee, or then I'm fine. Like, but then after a month of not being able to fall asleep during the daytime, that was hard.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
You got like an hour of sleep, and then you go to your next 12 hour. It's like,
no way, man.
But
no way.
And you're by yourself, so you're kind of just doing your thing.
In your own world. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, after a while, like I feel like I honestly think burnout is real. I don't think people.
It really is.
I feel like I think it's always been around. It's just people are finally bringing it up more.
100%.
But yeah, man. Like I don't know if you want to discuss a little bit about burnout. Like, what do you see podcast, or I don't know if you've done like specific episodes on it, or if you.
Yeah, actually, the closest we've gotten to having a full. I mean, I guess basically we did have a full episode about it when I had Alex Barker on. He talked about it because his book Indispensable basically talks about it. So I had him on twice actually. The first time he just basically talked about burnout, and then the second time he was on, we talked about his book, which is really, really great. And in his book, that's basically like the main theme is like just burnout. And the main message I think is like a lot of people that are working in pharmacy are getting paid really well, and they are hammered into them from pharmacy school, from their employer. Like as Alex so eloquently puts it, take your 6 figures and shut up. You know what I mean?
True.
And so even though they're feeling burnout inside, they're like, well, I can't really, who's going to listen to this? Or I can't really say anything about it. You know, I've got a mortgage, I've got kids, I've got student loans. Of course, I can't say anything or do anything about it. So yeah, burnout is real. I am blessed enough to have found an outlet to help me with burnout, because before the podcast, someone would yell at me and I'd be like, man, what a jerk. This is really wearing on me. And now when a patient yells at me, I'm like, well, that's content from our next episode. So I was blessed enough to find an outlet. And not everybody can start a podcast, but I know there are ways out there. And I know you guys are doing that with this podcast that we're on that right now, which is awesome. And I know Alex work, what he's doing is great, is showing people how they can find other means to like fight burnout. You know what I mean? And so the main message that we have talked about on the show, and with the main message that, as with most all of my episodes, I like to let people know is like, if you're feeling burnout, man, that's like you just said, you felt it. I felt it. It is real. And it's like, it's okay to say you feel that way. And it's okay to take even small steps to do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like, and it kind of like it took me until my wife brought it up, but like, you know, in terms of it was getting to me, and I'm sure other people can relate, it was getting to me almost like on a personal level, in terms of I would come home kind of already like in a bad mood, maybe not angry.
Yeah, man.
Just like
yeah,
not myself,
man.
you know? And she's like, I think it's getting to you, you know? And I'm like, you know, and then we had, you know, baby on the way, like I said earlier, and I was just like, man, like I got to nip it in the butt. I got to nip it in the butt before, like, you know, 10 years down the road, I'm like, man, like what happened to happen to me?
Dude, but, I'm so glad you did, man. I'm so glad you by the way, isn't it really weird? It should be worth mentioning. Like, you were in retail, right? So you got out of retail, okay? That's awesome. And I think it's freaking great that I find in our job, if you're working in retail pharmacy, it's such a weird dynamic, because I don't think there's a lot of jobs where if you're working at a job and someone comes to you and says, hey, I'm doing your same thing, but I got out. You're like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. You know what I mean? Like, that's the main default. Even though I'm like still rolling at my job and I feel totally fine there. I think the podcast is helping that. When you tell me you've been in retail and you got out and now you're doing this and doing stuff that you really love in pharmacy, I'm like, man, that's awesome, bro. You know what I mean?
I need your applause sound effect right now.
I'll see if I can like edit that in, or like talk like.
I think like it's a good and a bad thing. It's kind of like a lot of people have the desire like to not settle. Like they're almost like, oh, I don't want to settle with where I am. I'm just not really sure how to and where I want to go.
Yeah.
But then it's also kind of bad, because they're like, oh, like you're just like, you know, you're not enjoying your work. Like you can tell you don't like it, and you're just like, oh, I'm just stuck here. Like, so it's like depends on how you want to look at it. I was probably one of those ones where I was just like, oh, I'm stuck here. But also I was like, I also kind of thought I'm too young to like already not enjoy what I'm doing. I'm like going at 4 years.
How you tell yourself that.
I'm like, this is wrong.
I can't feel this way, but I really do feel this way.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, I don't know how, in terms of for you, your outlet was the podcast, which I think that's like awesome to find. Not even a side hustle. It's almost like a side project. You just find something you really enjoy to do. Like for me, I cut my hours down. Like I was like, I don't want to do 40 hours anymore.
Good for you, man. Yeah.
I want to be home more. Like I felt like lifestyle and personal health was just top priority for me, basically. Even though all of us, I'm not sure if you still do, but like most of us, we have student loans, but it's kind of like, I'm like, like I'd rather be here for life. Right. Yeah, I know. I'm like, I want to be here for, the next 60 years. I don't want to just to, for a paycheck. So for me, it was kind of like,
no, I was going to say like the big thing. Yeah. That I think I hear you saying too. And I totally agree, is like, you don't want to have regrets, man. You don't want to like if you're going to retire from retail, like I feel like that should be an active decision and not like a decision where you're like blink your eyes and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, what the hell just happened? Like, I didn't mean to retire from retail. I wanted to do something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a quality of life, not having regrets.
Yeah. So do you see yourself staying in retail then, or do you, for the time being, you found a good outlet, or?
That is the $1 million question. Man, Chris, I think so. For a while I was like, no way. I'm not retiring from retail. So the place I'm at right now, I'm like, if something else comes along and it's the right time and it just feels right, then sure, I'll leave. I will. There'll be a huge part of me that'll actually miss retail and the aspects about it. The podcast is creating this new spark in me to stay. And so like, if the opportunity comes up to leave retail and I think I need to take it, I'm going to be like even more sad that I have to stop the podcast, because I don't feel like I could, not be in retail until
personal interaction.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
If I tell people you're not alone, but I'm not with them, it doesn't really make sense. So I guess the answer is like, I'm not looking to leave retail. If something comes my way, if it's time, it's time. But I'm actually okay with how things are at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I mean,
Yeah,
for our listeners out there though, I feel like especially I guess we can focus more on retail,
yeah,
even like critical care pharmacists or hospital pharmacists where they're undertaking or overseeing hundreds of patients potentially.
yeah, sure.
I mean, burnout isn't just retail, right? It could be any
Oh gosh,
pharmacy.
dude. Yeah, percent.
But in terms of those who are looking for that outlet, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's not. You kind of were listening to podcasts and that kind of helped you determine, okay, yeah, I want to try that. Were there any other thoughts, or like, did you kind of think about other options that you had before you did that, or like to break it?
Well, yeah. So my path to becoming a pharmacist, I had been in retail for so long. I'm not doing residency. Like I'm just going straight to retail. And so I felt like I didn't have options. And so I just went straight into it. I don't know. Like I think when it came to the podcast, I was like, that was the first thing I really tried. I had the idea of side hustles. Like I had the idea of writing on the side. I had the idea of being a personal trainer on the side because I'm really into fitness and running and things like that.
In football?
Yeah, dude, really into football. I was like, maybe I could do something with fantasy football. I don't know. So there were some ideas, but the podcast was the first thing that I actually did. And I think a lot of it has to do with, it was, there wasn't like a ton on the line. The only thing for me on the line for starting the podcast was like, maybe my employer's going to hear this and they're not going to like what I'm saying about patients and I'm using my real name. So I'm going to be fired. So I was like, maybe, and then I was like, well, if I don't mention the company and if someone finds out and I get fired, it's whatever. I'm at this point, I'm just like, I'm so happy with what I'm doing and changed my perspective so much. I don't kind of care. But yeah, that was the podcast. Was the first thing I tried, and it just kind of clicked. So definitely blessed in that way.
In terms of like lifestyle now, like because I feel like most people who are in retail or any pharmacy, they might be exhausted from what day to day. You're already tired for the week, right? Do you feel like this just gives you the energy because you enjoy it so much that you're not as exhausted anymore, like as you were before starting it? Or
that's a good question.
I feel like it's a lot of work going into it, right? So.
Yeah. The podcast itself is yet to feel like a chore. So I don't feel so much the work of doing the podcast, the editing and all. My attitude and my perspective has been shifted, but I think there are some days, going into work, you're still like, man, that was rough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
It's still great. And the podcast itself, it's so far, it's just all fun from just record to release.
No, I feel like that's what everyone's kind of looking for, even if it's not changing their job, like finding something that they're passionate about, right? Like
big time. And so the Happy PharmD's message is, you can find what you're passionate about in pharmacy. And like, that doesn't necessarily, like you said, mean like changing jobs. Like you can find something on the side, a side hustle that you're passionate about that can just make you feel like you're doing something you're really passionate about, which can help you have a perspective shift at work, I guess.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with you. And I guess, before we close things up a little bit, for those that are listening who maybe do want to start a podcast, is there like a list of things that you would recommend them doing before they
Heck yeah, man.
start that? Okay.
Heck yeah.
What do you got?
Get started. Just do it. That's my short answer. So like there's two ways to do it, right? You can research the hell out of it and you can like get all the nicest equipment and you can like do all this stuff. And that's great if that's the kind of personality that you have. I think there's something to be said for buying a Blue Yeti for like $80, or I don't even know how much they are anymore, plugging it right in your computer and just starting it. They make it so easy these days to start a podcast. So my advice is to go ahead and just get the microphone and just start. Now, I had done some research. I actually had, I think it was like 20 or 30 episode ideas written out just to kind of get started. Okay. So maybe there's like a blend of the two where you do some research, but just it's not as daunting as it seems. Like just dive in and just go for it.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the biggest thing is just doing it, to be honest. Like most people are just like,
you learn as you go. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Awesome, man. No, I just want to thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Dude, it's been a blast, man. Thank you.
I appreciate it. No, thank you so much. And if you want to shout out for your podcast for anyone listening.
Absolutely. So yeah, if you are working in retail or any capacity in pharmacy and you have, you just need to vent or you need to like, if you want to connect with me about anything, any topics to discuss, Patients of the Week, which is a segment that I do where we talk about funny patients or interactions. Of course, we love to keep HIPAA intact, so keep HIPAA intact, and I can leave you anonymous. But if you have any of that stuff and want to connect with me or find me on social media, it's going to be at Retell Pharmacy. So it's RETELL Pharmacy. and I'm on Facebook and Twitter.
Awesome, Mitch. Thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks again for listening to the podcast today, guys. I hope you took a lot of helpful information from today's episode with Mitch, especially if you're in the beginning stages of possibly creating your own podcast or just contemplating if that is something right for you. I thought some really good, useful advice from Mitch was, even if you are contemplating that, the hardest thing is just to get started. So just start. Write things down, come up with some ideas, find something that you're truly passionate about, pharmacy related or not, and just get started. Also, we did discuss a little bit today about burnout, which is becoming more and more common in our field. And I just wanted to point your direction into a free webinar class that we are offering to listeners at thehappypharmd.com/begin. Again, that's thehappypharmd.com/begin. At this free webinar, we're going to talk how pharmacists can escape burnout, get job offers regularly, and finally take control of their careers. Please feel free, if you have any questions, to reach out to myself or anyone at the Happy PharmD. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great day.